Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I said to Senator Warner, seniority has its privileges. Since he raised the issue of the siting of the FBI building, I feel compelled, Mr. Chairman, to focus on that issue. And I will say, if my colleague wants additional time afterwards, so will I. So I'm going to start with you, Mr. Boreal, because we are talking about a different kind of discrimination. We're talking about discrimination that has an impact on economic opportunity and on the racial income and wealth gap in the Washington, D.C. area. And that has to do with the siting of federal agencies. And if you look at the history of siting of federal agencies in the Washington, D.C. area, there is no doubt that the majority black Prince George's County has gotten the short end of the stick. While Prince George's County has about 20% of the region's workforce, it hosts less than 5% of the region's office space. You have written a letter, you and other civil rights leaders have written a letter to the president and to the head of GSA on exactly this issue. Can you talk about your concerns and how this does play into the discussion about income and wealth equality?
When President Biden signed his executive order on racial equity, one element of its implementation was its impact on decision-making in the siting of federal facilities, not only in the DMV, but all across the nation, where courthouses, where federal buildings are located, to ensure that communities of color, urban communities, communities where black and brown people live would get their fair share of those investments. So in this instance, the leadership of Prince George's County and many leaders in Maryland, including yourself, reached out to many of us to suggest that Prince George's County had not been treated fairly in this decision-making historically, and that while I said earlier before you came into the room that my first choice was Washington, D.C., my second choice was New Orleans, my third choice was Newark, that it was okay if my fourth choice was Maryland and Prince George's County, because Prince George's County for the DMV represents something interesting. When I attended law school here at Georgetown in the 1980s, Prince George's County was a predominantly white, suburban and rural community. It has since become the largest predominantly black county anywhere in the United States. And notwithstanding the fact that there are many rising middle-class families in Prince George's County, there is still a high level of poverty, a high level of many, many challenges and issues that affect communities of color. So it seemed to make sense that in this instance, since the FBI insisted that it could no longer operate effectively solely in downtown Washington, D.C., that Prince George's County made a good sense place to ensure that a black community, a black jurisdiction, would have the opportunity to host and be the home of a facility that will employ literally thousands of people. But then the second and third impact of it in terms of services and retail and hotels is almost immeasurable over a period or an arc of probably 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years. So it was, Senator Warner, no slight to Virginia at all. It was this sort of analysis, but I also think that I want to give some due credit, because we're in a public hearing, to the fact that the community leadership and the local elected officials in Maryland got very active in reaching out and encouraging us to think about this and to support this instance. This is not something we would normally involve ourselves in, but because of the president's commitment to racial equity, supported by all of you, I think, here in this room, we think it's important that the administration be held accountable to live up to that when these decisions take place. So that's the background here. And again, no slight to the great state of Virginia, but sometimes when you face these sorts of things, in order to correct the imbalance, you've got to do things differently. And I think here, that's why Maryland seemed to make a good choice. But again, Senator Warner asked us to listen to what the people of Virginia or the community leaders of Virginia have to say. And while I've already written a letter, I'm certainly willing to do that along with my staff and I think the other civil rights leaders, because it's a fair thing to do. And maybe there's some perspectives on Northern Virginia that we're not aware of. But we're sticking with Maryland for now, since New Orleans and Washington and Newark
if I could,
aren't going to
Mr.
work.
Oriel, thank you. Well, no, I would just say to my colleague from Virginia, if he thinks that Virginia has some equities in this issue when it comes to the diversity of the community and the fact that Fairfax County has been overlooked, which it clearly has not, then he will agree with me that when the FBI and GSA grade the issue of equity, that they will raise it from the low 15% that it is to a higher amount that would reflect the president and the Biden administration's commitment to equity. And the president said, and I quote, when he issued that executive order, "We need to make the issue of racial equity not just an issue for any one department of government. It has to be the business of the whole government." And I would submit that the GSA and the FBI clearly haven't gotten the message, given the low weight they've given to this factor. And again, if my friend Senator Warner wants to join me in urging the administration to raise the weight of that factor, we welcome that.
Thank